In this video, we'll be diving into the difference between capital expenditures and maintenance, seeing how you can calculate those and have a better idea of how to forecast for them, and especially when you are analyzing deals, what numbers you should be using. So with that, let's dive in real quick. Before we start, my name is Will Singh. I am a local agent here in Portland, Oregon. So if you have any questions whatsoever, or if you're looking to connect, feel free to reach out. My contact information will be down below. Just as a heads up, I do have this video timestamped so you can jump to the part of the video that is most relevant to you. So first up, let's define each of these terms. When it comes to capital expenditures or CapEx, it is a long-term investment made to improve or increase the value of the rental. Now, this is going to be bigger expenses. For example, it's going to be the roof or going to be updating the HVAC system. These are usually bigger ticket items, and when we're looking at maintenance, the definition of maintenance is maintenance keeps the property in optimal condition in both function and comfort through a number of proactive and reactive maintenance tasks. Now, this can be as much as the lawn getting mowed and making sure that the outside of the house is properly cleaned. It can also include you having to fix a leaky dishwasher or fix anything else that's a little bit more of a minor problem. So next, I'll be diving into the quick way of going about how to analyze deals and how to factor in both capital expenditures and maintenance. Just know that this is more of a art than a science sometimes, and does take a lot of practice and also understanding where the costs are when it comes to buying or replacing or repairing things in a house. Now, with this, we're going to be looking at the capital expenditures first. When I'm looking at a property, I'm going to be looking at the major systems that are going to need to get updated at some point and understanding the lifetime of each of those. So for example, I'm going to be looking at the roof. I'm going to be looking at the water heater, the HVAC system, plumbing, electricity, seeing if there's any potential issues or understanding the fact that, hey, the lifetime of this product is going to be ending here soon or later. Now, with that, when I'm looking at the calculation side of seeing how much I should be accounting for capital expenditures, that's usually going to be anywhere between that 2 to 7%. Now, if I'm looking at that 7% or even above that, I'm going to say, okay, hey, the roof's got maybe 2 or 3 years left, and the plumbing is going to have to be replaced because it's galvanized piping and it will eventually have to get replaced. And I am already seeing these issues pop up. So just know that when it comes to houses that need a little bit more TLC, that's when I put the capital expenditures a little bit higher. Now, let's say it's a new build or they recently remodeled the entire thing. At that point, I'm probably not going to be as worried about the capital expenditures, especially if they just put a brand new 30-year roof on the house. Now, maintenance is something you're also going to have to keep account for. And this is a little bit harder to understand, but if you're noticing that the house just looks a little bit more run down, or you see a little bit older appliances or things of that nature, those are things or great indicators for you to know that you may have to deal with some sort of maintenance. A big factor for this is also going to be landscaping. So if you have a huge yard and it's going to be a lot of yard maintenance, make sure you keep that in mind when you're looking at the summer months or the spring months and factoring that in. Depending on the size of the yard, it could be anywhere between $50 to $100 a month, and sometimes even more than that, depending on what is needed. So when you're looking at that, keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to the amount I usually look at or am saving or calculating into the factors, it's going to be usually anywhere between 2 to 5% of the gross rents. So something where if I'm noticing it's a little bit more run down, then I'm probably going to have that a little bit higher. But if it's a new construction, then it's probably going to be closer to the 2%. Or it's been recently redone. So a question I get a lot is, how much should I have in reserve? Now, this is really dependent on the person. If you're a extremely risk-adverse person, you have to realize that you're going to have that number a little bit higher. If you are not as risk-averse and you're okay with taking on that potential liability, then just know that you can have that lower. For example, when I first started my journey, I did not have quite as much, and I was okay with having that risk because I knew that I could work extra hours if need be and get the money if need be as well. So with that, just keep that in mind when you are looking at this. But a general rule of thumb is going to be having about 3 months of reserve when it comes to having a property, and closer to that 6 months if you're a little bit more conservative. And if you really wanted to, you could have as much as a year, but just know that that's completely up to you. And it's a number that whatever makes you feel comfortable is a big part of what that is. If you can't sleep at night and you don't have enough reserve, then that's going to be a great indicator that you're probably going to want to have a little bit more. So if you are looking to take a deep dive into the calculations when it comes to the capital expenditures, this is when you're going to need to break out that Excel sheet. So just know when you are underwriting a larger deal, this is something that is very similar to what someone does when it's a commercial apartment building and understanding the costs of all of that. So just know if you're buying your first house hack or something of that nature, that you may not have to be quite as detailed, but if you're wanting to take that next step, this is a opportunity for you to do that. And usually I recommend that when you're closer into the inspection period, just because there's so much to really understand. So keep that in mind. So once you've gotten a list of the things that you'll need to do that are considered capital expenditures, this will probably include the roof. This is going to include the water heater, having to repipe if need be, along with painting a house. Just keep in mind that you're going to want to then put all these into an Excel sheet. And then from here, we're going to use the formula monthly cost equals replacement cost divided by the lifespan in years times 12. So this will help you get a better idea of what the monthly cost is. Once you've been able to add all those figures in, and you might need some help from a general contractor or your agent who has some better idea of what these will generally cost, then you would then add all of those up, and that is going to be a much more detailed idea of the capital expenditures you will need to put aside on a monthly basis. Now, if you already have a stash of money on the side for reserve, then you may not have to worry about having to pay that full amount. But if you're wanting to do the full underwriting and get that detailed, then that's totally up to you. Some other things I do want to note is that usually it takes about 3 to 5 years for your rental portfolio to really stabilize, or a property to really stabilize. So that way you understand the cost and how much it costs when it comes to the maintenance side of things. So especially those first couple of years, it can take a little while for you to really understand what the maintenance costs might be. So keep that in mind when you are looking at this or looking at investment properties. And on another side note, I do want to note that it's great to dive into these details, but there is a point where you're going to hit a analysis paralysis, especially if you're starting to do those deep dives in terms of the calculations. And just know it's good to kind of step back a little bit and say, what's the big picture here? And is this ultimately going to help build my financial future? So something to note, especially if you're even diving into these deep dive calculations, that you will want to have a moment where you step back and say, hey, overall, does this make sense for the timeline and what I'm looking to build in the future? Another question that is asked is also, how do you even separate these out? And this is more of a logistical question. And if you're wanting to get a better way of transferring funds, I always recommend talking to a CPA, but typically they're going to get lumped in to the same account for the most part. And you can then use an Excel sheet to break these costs down, or every month figure out how much you're saving towards each of them. But for the most part, they will get put into a similar bank account, especially when you're starting out. And from there, you can break it out as needed. Now, once you obviously start having a lot more rentals and needing a little bit more of a complex system, that's when I would recommend talking to a CPA and figuring out what the best strategies are and how you would want to break that up if need be. I want to capitalize on this moment and ask you to like and subscribe. It helps out my channel tremendously, and I greatly appreciate it. And if you found any of this content helpful, it would be wonderful if you could also comment down below of what you found most helpful, so that way I can continue to deliver great content for you. Thank you so much for watching.